Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. The May 14th, 2024 regular council meeting is called to order at 4 o'clock. Council would like to acknowledge the Ucluelethat on whose traditional territories the District of Ucluelet operates. Audience members and delegates are advised that this proceeding is being video recorded and broadcast on YouTube and Zoom, which may store data on foreign servers. There are two late items. The first is correspondence related to bylaws item 6.4, zoning amendments B&B regulation and new R1-H zone, which include two emails. The second item is revised Appendix A to item 6.3, zoning amendments, small-scale multi-unit housing. I move that the agenda be amended by adding the first late item, correspondence related to bylaws item 6.4, zoning amendments B&B regulation and new R1H zone under item 6.4, and replacing Appendix A to item 6.3 with the second late item, revised Appendix A to item 6.3, zoning amendments, small-scale multi-unit housing, which is a revised version of draft bylaw number 1346.
So moved.
Seconded?
I'll second.
I think, oh, okay, I moved.
Oh, sorry.
You seconded. All in favor?
Third.
That carries. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Councillor Hoare,
Second.
Councillor Kennington, all in favor? None opposed, that carries. There are 2 minutes for adoption today. The first minutes are from the March 26, 2024 regular council meeting. Are there any errors or omissions? No, seeing none, may I have a motion to adopt the March 26, 2024 regular council meeting minutes as presented?
So moved.
Oh, it was a tie. Councillor Mafty, you got that one.
Second.
Councillor Kennington. Oh. Next time. All in favor? None opposed, that carries. The second minutes are from the April 16th, 2024 regular council meeting. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, may I have a motion to adopt the April 16th, 2024 regular council meeting minutes as presented?
So moved.
Councillor Anderson,
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare, all in favor? That carries. Is there any unfinished business? No. Okay. We have 4 bylaw items on the agenda. The first bylaw item is 6.1, 5-year financial plan and tax rate bylaws adoption. This item will be presented by the Director of Finance, Mr. Cadman. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. As per the report in your packages, the 5-year financial plan and annual tax rate bylaws were presented and given the first 3 readings at the council meeting on April 30th. This report is to recommend the adoption of those 2 bylaws.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council? There are 2 motions and they should be moved separately, please.
I can do that.
Councillor Anderson?
I move that council adopt District of Ucluelet 2004-2028 financial plan bylaw number 1339, 2024.
I think it's 2024, not 2004.
Oh, 2024. Should I start again?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's try this again. I would move that council adopt District of Ucluelet 2024 to 2028 financial plan bylaw number 1339, 2024.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Mafty, any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed, that carries.
I will further move that council adopt District of Ucluelet annual tax rates bylaw number 1340, 2024.
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed, that carries. Thank you. The second bylaw item is 6.2, zoning and DP amendments for Warehouser Ocean West Phase 5. This item will be presented by the Director of Community Planning. After the Director presents, there will be an opportunity for the applicant's representative to address Council. Welcome, Mr. Gregg.
Thank you, and could I share my screen, please? Okay, so this is the Ocean West Phase 5 subdivision, as you can see on your screen. The aerial photo, it's basically off the western end of Marine Drive, the terminus there, and the extension of Forbes Road. This actually started in 2018. There was a development permit that was issued in 2018 for the Phase 5 of the Ocean West development. And this next slide shows more or less this is a pretty current air photo. So work was commenced as the report indicates that there have been a couple of delays on the project. One, COVID came along, and at the time, I think the property owner, they were busy building plywood and decided to sort of hit pause on the development plans. I think there was some assumption that interest in rural properties would go down, and of course, as we know, the pandemic had the opposite effect. So things were restarted, and then there was a delay caused by a bit of a disagreement with the province around the wetland delineation that had been done. And so there's basically that has now been resolved. In October, the province authorized a wetland compensation plan, which requires some changes. So this that's on the screen was the plan from 2018 for the development permit. I'm going to point out just a couple of things, and then sort of to keep an eye on for the following slides. Okay, so as noted, this would be the extension of Forbes Road that would go down and connect to Marine Drive. That is something, and so there's two locations where things are sort of been adjusted, up towards the top, towards Tugwell, and then down really right by the Marine Drive connection. That there was noted that there were some wet areas, and the biologist had assessed those, and that's where some of the changes are. So again, this slide just sort of highlights those changes. While I'm on this slide, I'll also point out the original development permit included, there was a pathway really serving the internal pedestrian circulation within the site here. And that, I'll talk about it in a moment with the new plan. And just note there was a pathway connection from this upper cul-de-sac over to this trail, which would go around and sort of down towards the Wild Pacific Trail. So this plan, which is from the wetland compensation plan, again, those areas up towards Tugwell, in this corner is where one of the wetlands is that serves part of the headwaters for what's called Ravenhaven Creek. And then this area, which has the bigger impact, and you can see this was the alignment of Forbes Road was really going right along the edge of this wetland at the head of what's called Stream 14. So in order to protect, remediate, and compensate for the wetland impact, Forbes Road needs to shift towards the west. So this plan, which is the updated site plan, shifts Forbes Road, and those areas which were identified, one of the major changes is that they're proposing, as part of the sort of protection of wetlands, is to set those aside as parkland. So that's additional park dedication that would be a result of this, both up towards Tugwell and down towards Marine Drive. And there's another lot that's opposite here connecting, where it's a very wet ravine. This is where, if you're familiar with the pathway that goes up behind Sinamaka, there's sort of stairs down and a boardwalk and stairs back up. That's really a very wet site. So that would become part of the park, is that little green space there. So the result of this, of having to set aside more land to protect the wetlands, is a request to change the zoning to allow the lot size, not the lot number to change, but really the lot sizes to shift, so that they still have the same number of parcels of land in their subdivision, because there are a couple of odd shaped lots that they're still squeezing in to try and get the same number of housing sites. So that's really what the amendment has been based on. And so as part of the zoning amendment would go into the comprehensive development zone that this is part of, and change the balance of the large, because the CD zone was set up to have a certain number of large lots, small lots, and medium lots, and a number of those have already been used with the first 4 phases of Ocean West, and that so now within the balance of this, in order to meet the new lot sizes, it needs to be adjusted and shifts half a dozen of those lots. So that's really the core of the bylaw amendment. It does not change the uses that are permitted on those lots. They are left as was, single-family lots. And the other thing what I'm highlighting here is that there are 3, because of there's some narrower lot frontages where they connect. There's 2 things. One would be a development variance permit. So the 3 sort of oval bits here, or that would need a variance to the minimum lot frontage that's in the zoning for those 3 lots. And then the 6 boxes there, those also, there's this sort of duplicate requirement under the Local Government Act to have a minimum of 10% of a lot perimeter as frontage, unless it's exempted by council. And so that would be a motion of council, and both of those would come back at a later date, if and when the zoning goes through, to also get those issued so they could pursue or proceed with their subdivision. Because they have, essentially there were approved engineering plans, all of which has been adjusted for this shift of the road. There's quite a significant cut on the hillside there that'll be required in order for the road to move towards the west. And so all that engineering work's basically, been done to update what had been approved back in 2018, 2019. And I'm going to just go forward here one more slide. So this would essentially be the updated plan that would be updating the development permit from the old plans to the new ones. And I had noted there was this pathway. It's missing on the plan, but we've discussed it. Really, that allows a connection through from the top of this cul-de-sac over to this trail. And so that is basically added in. That would be part of the subdivision as well. This larger lot, as has always been proposed, that's still zoned for single family. In the near future, I think once the subdivision is done, essentially, I believe Weyerhaeuser does have plans to rezone that to allow a multi-family use, which is why that parcel was created of that size. But at this point, they are really looking to move forward and complete the subdivision. On this plan, I'll point out a couple things. So some of the wetlands also that had been noted as by the new work by the biologists are sort of off the site. This area down here, some may be familiar with. It's a clearing that was basically a leftover from previous work. It's just off the Wild Pacific Trail, and that's part of their compensation, is actually create new wetland area down there. And so that's been all approved as part of the ministry work, that this is basically some replanting and revegetation, but as the stream goes in here, that area is kind of a flat level area that hasn't been wetland, that now would become a constructed wetland as part of their work. And the last bit is that in discussions with the applicant, there's a timing issue. So the zoning amendment is one thing, and that would require, obviously there's a recommended motion that's in your agenda. And the development permit, the updating of the site plan to include the new plan, really could happen, is really not affected by the zoning necessarily, because essentially it's for whether or not the zoning were approved. Forbes Road needs to move to the west to avoid that wetland. And so if the zoning weren't approved, they would be in a position where, in order to move forward with their subdivision, they need to remove some of the lots to create the larger lots, which the older zoning allows. So that they can sort of move independently. There's definitely interest in having the development permit issued sooner rather than later. The reason being is that we've learned there's a bit of a deadline for getting the wetland remediation done by September 15th for the developer, and they have quite a bit of work to do to move that road, and that all the blasting and clearing and road construction really has to happen before they can get into remediating and constructing wetlands immediately next to it. So a couple of weeks apparently really does make a difference, and because we need to give notice of first reading for the zoning bylaw, that won't happen until later on the agenda, later on your calendar, essentially in June. But we're recommending that today council could authorize the amendment of the original development permit, essentially to insert the new plans. And if so, then we have prepared an additional motion to that effect. I'll pause there and see if there's any questions, and I believe as well the representative for Weyerhaeuser or two maybe on the line.
Any questions from council for staff? I was under the impression that they had already remediated the wetland.
No, there's work to be done.
Okay, so they're
Yes.
in the process.
Yes, and there's the plans include some extensive replanting in some of those areas, and some regrading work where there's that new area as well. The part of the plan requires that they monitor the effectiveness of that over, like, monitor it on year 1, 3, 5, 7. I mean, it's quite a long-term commitment they have to ensure the health of that little bit of ecosystem.
Great, thank you. Would the applicant's representative like to address council? If you're attending by Zoom and wish to speak, please click the raise hand icon.
Mr. Trowbridge, you should be able to unmute.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
We don't have anything additional to add. I appreciate the presentation.
Okay, any questions from council to the applicant? No? Okay, thank you for being present for the presentation.
Thank you.
So there is a recommendation if someone would like to move that.
I'll move that council authorize the Director of Community Planning to execute and issue the amended development permit DP 18-07 to allow the updated plans as attached to report number 24-43.
Do I have a
No,
second?
sorry. I think that's something else, isn't it? Or is that the correct one?
I think that's the subsequent one.
There's now two. I don't think the order matters.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, we'll stick with that one. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Councillor Hoare, any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries.
I'll further move that council direct staff to give notice of first reading of District of Euclid zoning amendment bylaw number 1341, 2024.
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries. Thank you.
Go forth and remediate wetlands.
The third bylaw item is 6.3, zoning amendments, small-scale, multi-unit housing. This item will also be presented by the Director of Community Planning, Mr. Gregg.
Thank you. And through the mayor, I'd say this is sort of small-scale, multi-unit housing round one, perhaps. Essentially, there have been some changes in provincial legislation as the report outlays. The district basically is required to update its zoning bylaw to ensure that a minimum of one secondary suite or one detached accessory dwelling unit is permitted on all lots zoned for single-family use. And so bylaws to enact these zoning amendments must be adopted by municipalities no later than June 30th of this year. This is now new legislation the province has handed to us. So as noted in the report, when we're doing those amendments, we need to consult with the province's small-scale multi-unit housing site standards that they've provided us. And so the bylaw amendment, okay, so the bylaw amendment is essentially doing these things. It would allow a secondary suite or an accessory residential dwelling unit in all of our zones that allow single-family principal uses. That was already true for almost all of the zones. Really, the R6 zoning designation restricted accessory dwelling units on smaller lots. And so the draft bylaw would remove that restriction. And that R6, that would be the single-family lots that were proposed to be developed on Lot 16 across the road here. As well, what's drafted is matching the minimum setbacks for accessory dwelling units as, laid out in the provincial site standards. So that would be a front yard setback of 6 meters, a rear yard of 1.5 meters, and a side yard interior of 1.2 meters, which is slightly less than what our current zoning would require. And also increasing the maximum height of single-family dwellings and accessory residential dwelling units to match the provincial site standards. So most of our single-family zones would say a single-family house is 8.5 meters, and that would increase to 11 meters. And the amended agenda with the updated bylaw includes that. We realize in the report it describes that we'd be increasing that, but there is a section that was actually missing out of the draft bylaw. So that it basically identifies each of those residential zones and would make that amendment to go to 11 meters, which is typically would allow for 3 stories for a single-family home, essentially throughout town. And the other change is for accessory residential dwelling units. The province's standard is 8 meters, which would allow for a 2-story ADU. When the accessory dwelling unit was added into the zoning 2 years ago in Euclid, it was kept a little lower, and then it was sort of like 4.5 meters. And if you were further away from the lot line, it could go higher. Was essentially to minimize the potential for disrupting the neighbors, essentially, to have a new home that was closer to a fence line or that sort of thing, looking into the backyard. The provincial standards are really prioritizing loosening up the regulations to create more housing. So this would essentially give a larger latitude for designing a home that would be added to a residential lot. And then the last thing, is the parking requirements. So really for a secondary suite or for a accessory dwelling unit, the parking requirement already is 1 parking space. The difference is that currently our zoning regulations would require 2 parking spaces for a house. If you're adding a suite or an ADU, you add a parking spot for each of those. Really, it shifts so that if you had a house with a suite or with an ADU or a duplex with a suite or any of those, it's really 1 per dwelling unit. So a house with 2 parking spaces could add a suite and not add another parking space. It's sort of the simplified way of looking at it. Or if you had 3 units on the property, you'd have a minimum of 3 parking spaces. So that's essentially, those are the amendments that would bring things into alignment with what the province is asking for. And that's it. In other communities, I'm sure council and members of the community may have heard in the news about some of the changes that are happening. Larger communities are required to do more, where single-family properties must allow a minimum of 4 units or 6 units or 8 units, or depending on the urban area and closeness, how close they are to transit and things like that. But for smaller communities, this really is the minimum standards. I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. I did have one question on your report. It says local governments may decide to permit either a secondary suite or an ADU, or both a secondary suite and an ADU. So we're choosing the latter, is that correct?
So we're not mostly yes. This bylaw wouldn't change that use or mix of uses within all of our residential zones. Most of our residential zones and properties would allow both. The one, that R6, which generally has a smaller lot, that zone, it was drafted to allow either a suite or an ADU because they are generally, the average lot size was 480 square meters. It was quite a bit smaller than most of the existing single-family lots in town. So it would still comply with the provincial requirements, but this wouldn't change that necessarily.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from council?
Yeah, through the mayor, are we adjusting the FAR for those, or are we supposed to build multiple units within the same restricted floor area?
This does not change the floor area ratio, so really the total square footage or gross floor area of buildings on a property would still be a function of that percentage of the site area. So a larger lot could still have more buildings on it.
I think we need to look at that and discuss what the impacts of that would be, because in a lot of cases, even a modest house will use up all the floor area ratio. So this would be a sort of a moot point to do this if we couldn't actually build within those parameters?
What is the floor area ratio at the moment?
We're talking about a dozen different zones. Most of them are parallel and are similar. So it's like 0.35 would be your floor area ratio for a typical lot. As you get it, the more recently created zones, like the R6, for example. So those were smaller lots. Instead of being 780 or 800 square meter lots, 7 or 8,000 square foot lots. The average size of those lots is around 480 square meters. So in that case, it was an FAR of 0.35, just like others, but there was a bonus. So that if you're doing the suite or the ADU, it didn't eat into that. It went to 0.5. So that on smaller lots, you tend to have higher floor area ratios. The R4 zone, Paso Melfort, it has a bit of a range of floor area ratios, but they tend to be up at that sort of higher higher limit as well. So
Sorry. So wow, that's loud. So currently, it is possible if you were to use this new zoning that you would have an increased FAR based on their existing zoning for basically density bonusing, correct?
In the R6 zone, there is kind of a density bonusing, in the sense that you're capped on the size of the main house. But if you want to add a second dwelling, there's more floor area for that. And it's the accessory dwelling unit was also there's some essentially it's not capped by the maximum. In some of the zones have a maximum accessory building, which would be quite restrictive, of the garden shed or whatnot, and it's sort of free from that. But in terms of the overall gross floor area that you could build on a single family lot in town, this bylaw amendment is not blanket increasing that.
I think it would be wise to look at implementing the same sort of policy we have for R6 then. Because even on a 7,000 square foot lot, there's not really room to do it. If we're trying to promote housing, we need to make sure that the housing that's getting built makes sense.
Through the mayor, if that's an interest, certainly we could provide that and do a bit of a study. Because one of the things is that I'd say there's probably few lots that are built up to the maximum today. Particularly some of the older existing houses in town would have essentially. Yeah, they're not built to the maximum. They were sort of built to a standard, and there's such a variety of lot areas as well that a bit of analysis of saying, okay, where are we at? How close are people bumping up against that limit? And if so, raising the floor area ratio is something that could be looked at.
Could that be looked at in a case-by-case situation?
Certainly, if we had applications, if someone was coming forward and saying, okay, here's a use that's permitted, but I'm right at the limit there, then they could certainly apply to increase that. And there have been some cases where those amendments have been made.
Great, thank you.
But we can't do a variance for density, so that would essentially be a spot rezoning, which adds cost and time to a project and would seriously delay housing.
Is that a question?
No, it's more of a statement that if the goal here is housing and to increase the housing stock on single family lots, then I don't think this goes far enough to make it possible for people. Like, we need to remove the barriers to people doing this. Like, recent ADUs have run into this issue where it's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, and it would be better if we could reduce the red tape to doing it, because that's where the costs start piling up, and money and time sensitive and interest rates and everything is a hindrance to housing. So it's just something maybe we should look at. I don't know.
Jot that down, Mr. Gregg.
Absolutely. I think there's, as I said, this is probably the first round of zoning amendments to look at alternatives to provide opportunities for more housing in town on single-family lots, and I think that's something that we certainly could look into. And I think part of it is saying, okay, is it if what's here on the books today, is it a restriction? To what degree is it a restriction, and what can reasonably be built there? I think this sort of immediate changes of lessening the setbacks and increasing the height does certainly give a lot of flexibility within sort of like the total envelope you can build within. But as I said, for this pass, it as drafted, it wouldn't increase the maximum total area. And whether floor area ratio is even the best limit or regulatory tool, it may be that there's another way of doing it. I'm just looking at what the maximum, building size or unit size and make it a little simpler.
Any other questions for Mr. Gregg?
Through the mayor, just to clarify a point, I know that in some areas of town, there are setbacks that aren't necessarily district imposed, but there's like a building schema for the development. Would this trump that? Like, for example, I know Rainforest Drive has pretty generous setbacks and they're meant to, maintain privacy and remain forested. So if someone comes to council and says, you know what, I'd like to do this, and it's going to fit with what council's saying, but it's going to go against the scheme for the Rainforest Drive development, what happens? Because I think that at that point they might open themselves up to, even theoretically legal action from their neighbors. Would this trump all of that?
No, that essentially the building schemes are a contract between neighboring property owners. They are essentially put on the property by a developer. Generally, they're a marketing tool of this is the form of the development you're buying into. It can say things like only use cedar shingles and no pink vinyl siding and no clotheslines and all kinds of things. It can also say things like no secondary suites, no subdivision, no, it's kind of restrictions that the developer puts in place that they think are going to make it a better product, if you will. So they can be somewhat problematic because the district is not party to them. And so it could well be that some of the regulatory changes that we're making to enable more housing are going to run into a roadblock in some of those cases and that's a question that I know I've heard a number of times put to the province now, saying, hey, what happens if we are saying your zoning has to allow 6 units in an urban area and you've got a neighborhood that says, no, only single family, no secondary suites or whatnot? Does this legislation override? And essentially it's no, but it's something that the province is aware of and is looking at. So there may be some changes in the future, but around, do those building schemes apply or do they become something that's obsolete? That would have to be done by legislation. But at this point, no, someone who's building would have to meet both. So if they just follow it, we don't look at the building scheme or enforce it when issuing a building permit, but if someone skips a requirement or a responsibility they have under their building scheme to get their plans approved by the developer, and it can be problematic if the developer is long gone.
Right.
Now it's, how do you get it approved by a group of neighbors? I mean, some of them are very poorly written.
So
it can be kind of problematic.
At this point, though, like where the rubber meets the road, if someone with a home on Rainforest Drive comes in to the district and requests a building permit that violates the scheme but not this bylaw, they would get that building permit, and as far as the district's concerned, they'd be allowed to go ahead, come what may, with their neighbors and the developer.
That we're looking at what are the setbacks. We'll alert them to it, but we're not party to the building scheme. So enforcing it is not something that the district is responsible for. And further to complicate things and confuse things, in Euclid you have some subdivisions where there are building schemes that are doing things like having green space setbacks. And in other places you have restrictive covenants doing essentially the same thing. And those, the district is named because of the way the subdivision was done. So there are things like stream setbacks and green space covenants where, yes, we are a party to it, and that is something that was required as part of the subdivision, and the municipality enforces or has control over those. So if you're coming for a building permit and weren't in compliance with one of those, no, you wouldn't get your building permit. So it can be confusing for people who are out there looking at, what are these different legal instruments. So understanding what is on your lot is important. And so, but essentially what we're looking at is, what are the municipal regulations and what's the province requiring that municipalities look at?
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson?
Through the mayor, and I recall that with Lauren White. I think we had that situation where there was a green space covenant that we had to deal with, and that was through. I had a question, more of a curiosity, is the variation in FARs in places like Pass and Melfort. how does that exist, or how if you have a variation of FARs?
Through the mayor. Paston Melford is not the shining example of how to do things clearly and simply. There was some confusion over what had been the allowable FAR, and so a bunch of houses were built with permits greater than the floor area ratio that the zoning allowed, because there was a building scheme that said something different, and at the time staff looked at one and not the other, and it was incorrect. So there's a patchwork of zoning that has very site specific. This lot is 0.35 and this one's 0.5 or 5.2 or 4.7. It's a whole patchwork because that was a unique situation. So that was not by design. It was more an evolution of the process, I'd say. So.
Sorry, just further for that, if someone were to rebuild, like tear down a house that was on like a lot that was whatever, say like 0.35, or say they had something bigger, like it was a 0.5, and then they tore down, they wanted to rebuild, would they be susceptible to the FAR rules now, or would they be able to ride with that?
The FAR is really almost lot by lot in that particular neighborhood, and it reflects what's been built. So they wouldn't be restricted. They could be built back. Essentially, you could think of it as sort of similar to the scale of what are the buildings that are there today. That's what the zoning allows. The zoning was tailored to match the buildings rather than buildings being built to follow a consistent zoning, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? There is a recommendation if somebody would like to move it.
I'll move that council direct staff to give notice of first reading of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1346, 2024.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to just push the FAR question a little bit further as to, so it doesn't die on the floor here. Is there any, can we direct staff to report on what that looks like and what it means and what our options are for increasing the FAR for all R1s?
Sure. Mr. Rotenberg, do you need that more specific?
So you have a motion on the floor. My recommendation in this case would be to debate the motion. So you've got mover and seconder, debate the motion, and then maybe Councillor Kennington, you can make your motion at the conclusion. I'm assuming this is not intended to be an amendment.
I think it would be a whole separate motion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a first and second. Any further discussion on the motion on the floor? All in favor? None opposed? That carries. Go ahead, Councillor Kennington.
I didn't mean to jump the gun with the first one. If you have
No, I just, this has been something that's been on my mind for a while. So, I'm not saying a blanket FAR increase for R1s. If you're doing a single-family home, you stick with the R35. It's more of an additional. If you're going to add a housing unit, that it's kind of an incentive to do so. So whether that looks like the R6, where you're increased to a multifamily style density for your property, if you're going to provide the housing, if that makes sense.
So we're looking for a report from staff regarding amending the FAR for multiple housing units on a single family lot.
I second that. So moved.
Did you get that, Mr. Rotenberg?
I think so.
Okay. So I moved it, you seconded it. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries. Great. Thank you. The final bylaw item is 6.4 zoning amendments B&B regulation and new R1-H zone. This item will also be presented by Mr. Gregg.
Thank you, and through the mayor, I would note essentially this is in response to some requests from council on April 16th, I think, at your meeting, requesting some bylaw amendments. And I would note there's and so we're looking for direction from council in the table of options at the end of the report. I think options A, B, and C all relate to the first bylaw, and option D really addresses the second bylaw. But a little bit of background, because the request was looking at changes to some of the zoning regulations that affect B&B uses that were brought in with bylaw 1310, and 1310 was adopted in 2022. Let's go back to sharing my screen here. And so there were a number of amendments made to the regulation. Really, at the intent of council at the time was to, as the report describes, was to essentially try and slow down the development of sort of the guest suite type pattern of tourist accommodation that was being built particularly with new single family homes, and instead use the regulations to allow sort of the traditional B&B, if you will. And in particular, these clauses 7, 8, 9, and 10 under section 404.1, which is the bed and breakfast regulations in the zoning bylaw, they required 4 things. One, that essentially a bed and breakfast would have to be consistent with a traditional bed and breakfast use. A bed and breakfast use must include a minimum service of a continental breakfast. Clause 8, a bed and breakfast use must be accessed from the main entry of the home in which it operates and cannot operate remotely utilizing coded entry locks and or key lock boxes. So really go through the front door like a traditional B&B where the host is hosting you in bedrooms of their home. 9, any exterior doors or rooms used for bed and breakfast uses must not be utilized as the principal entrance and exit to the bed and breakfast use. And 10, a bed and breakfast use is an integral part of the home and must not have a separated or locked off common area. So those are kind of the sort of key pieces around the traditional B&B use. And so as requested, that bylaw number 1344 would simply remove those sections from the bylaw. I think those sections have somewhat slowed the construction of kind of the guest suite pattern. The other thing noted in the report is, and it's in the sort of sidebar, if you will, it's on page 127 of your agenda. There was a section that was added as well, that section 404.24, which would not be removed by the bylaw as it's been drafted, and that was the part that said a bed and breakfast suite cannot be in a secondary suite or in an area that was a secondary suite. And I think that's a key part of the regulation because it really slowed the conversion of secondary suites into B&B units. And I know since there was some discussion a few weeks ago, we have heard from folks who are interested in utilizing that if it were being removed, but that has a significant impact on the existing secondary suites in town. So to be clear, the bylaw amendment that's drafted would remove what's highlighted in yellow, so that those restrictions were no longer part of the bylaw. So that's, I'll pause and see if there's any questions because there are 2 bylaws that are on your agenda, but is there anything in particular about bylaw 1344?
Any questions from council?
Yeah, through the mayor. The principal residence rule, which is a good one, I believe, and that's intact or?
That would not change.
Okay.
The only change would be these 4 things.
Councillor Anderson?
As well as the 35% rule, I believe is still staying there.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good one as well, I think.
No other questions? Did we want to vote on these separately, or do you want to proceed with your next commentary about 1345?
That's up to council if you
Okay.
want to. Either way.
Okay, so we have A, B, and C options relate to bylaw number 1344. Does council wish to make one of those motions? Page 128 and 129.
Okay. So that's option A. And there's three motions? Are those separate or together?
You can do those together.
Okay. I'll move that council give first reading to District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1344, 2024. And I will move that council give second reading to District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1344, 2024. And I will also move that council refer District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1344, 2024 to a public hearing.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor Anderson seconds. Any further discussion? None? All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. Go ahead, Mr. Gregg.
Thank you. And through the mayor, the next request was to basically draft a zoning bylaw that would amendment or a new zone that would essentially be a version of the R1 zone without the bed and breakfast use. So the table on the screen here sort of compares them. That really in terms of uses, it would still allow the principal uses, single family dwelling. The secondary uses would remain the same without the bed and breakfast use. So it'd be home occupation, secondary suite, and accessory residential dwelling unit would be there. The other thing to note as you get down in the table towards the maximum height, it would change the new zone, draft zone would have the 11-meter height and the setbacks of 6 meters for the front and rear and 1.2 on the side. That, again, that aligns with the new provincial sort of site standards for residential zones. So we figured, okay, as we're drafting a new zone, let's just bring that forward with that form. I'll see if there's any questions on that. As at this point, this would not be applied to any land. This is essentially a text amendment. So if because it is for residential use as well, this is a zoning change that if council wished to move it forward, we would give notice of first reading, and that would be at a future meeting.
Thank you. So this would be on the books basically for a future zoning purpose.
But certainly it could then be applied as part of, I think we're going to be revisiting our zoning in the near future here around all residential uses. It could be used then or with a development application that's coming forward, essentially just sort of provides the framework for it.
Any questions for Mr. Gregg? No? Okay. I believe that is option D, if somebody would like to move that one.
I'll move that council direct staff to give notice of first reading of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1345, 2024.
I'll second that.
Councillor Anderson seconds. Any further discussion? No? All in favor? None opposed? That carries. Great report. Great reports. Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Okay, there are 3 report items on the agenda. The first report item is 7.1 mobile vending application, sub 49 food truck and catering. This report will also be presented by Mr. Gregg, and after he presents, the applicant will have an opportunity to address council.
Thank you. And through the mayor, this is pretty straightforward. The food truck, some will know it as the Cheeses food truck, is changing ownership. The transfer of the license requires a council approval. It's a kind of strange little bit of our business licensing bylaw that mobile vending licenses need to be approved by council, and that includes the transfer because they are sort of a personal license. The proposal is not to change the location. There's already a development permit for the location in front of the ANAF. So it really just is a change of ownership and menu to go along with it, I believe. But it does need council approval. If there's any questions, I certainly could attempt to answer them, and I do believe the applicant may be raising his hand on Zoom as well.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Gregg? Pretty straightforward. Is the applicant on Zoom?
Mr. Kenyon, you should be able to unmute.
Hey, good afternoon there.
Hi, Damien.
Hey, good afternoon. Yep, It should be a very simple process. Nothing with the actual food truck itself is changing. You'll see we've already changed the colour of it just to make it a little bit more presentable. The menu will be remaining the same with a couple of additional items in the long run, but as regards to the business, nothing will change, purely just the ownership. Instead of saying Nilsson, it'll be myself and Nick, my partner.
Great.
Other than that, unless anyone has any questions, nothing further to add.
Any questions from council? No, it's pretty straightforward. Thank you for being online for this, though.
Thank you very much.
There is a motion.
I'll do that.
Great.
I would move that council approve the issuance of mobile vending business license for the sub 49 food truck and catering food truck located at 1708 Peninsula Road, Lot 1, Plan VIP 5190, Clackwood District.
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries. Thank you. The next report item is 7.2, Notice of Land Disposition Lease Agreement, Cedar and Salt. Oh, that's painful.
Hi.
This
Sorry.
report will be presented by the Director of Community Service, Ms. Fortune.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Before you have a recommendation that Council authorize staff to issue a public notice of property disposition for a portion of the lands more commonly referred to as Amphitrite House Cafe section by way of lease to Cedar and Salt. As well, upon the completion of the notice of disposition, Council authorize the Director of Community Services to execute a lease. So a request for proposal was issued seeking proposals for operation and facility oversight at the newly rebuilt Amphitrite House to be open early summer this year. Yay. Specifically, the district was looking for proponent to provide a dedicated retail food or service or other visitor-oriented opportunity in addition to general oversight services of the venue, support maintenance of the washroom, and open and close the venue when required. Two groups submitted proposals, Wild Pacific Trail Society and Cedar and Salt. Although keen to propose a collaboration with another proponent, the Wild Pacific Trail did not meet the minimum requirements of being able to operate and provide oversight year-round. Cedar and Salt addressed all components of the RFP and were able to meet the minimum requirements of the year-round operation. Their vision is to create a warm and inviting space where customers can enjoy delicious food and beverages in a cozy atmosphere, which is what we all hope for. Cedar and Salt has extensive experience in providing these types of meal operations. Cedar and Salt's operation will be conducted in a manner that minimizes disruption to the regular programming within the public portion of the facility. And the owner and myself have had good discussions regarding that. Cedar and Salt identifies reducing and managing waste as a priority on an ongoing basis, and Cedar and Salt is committed to maintain the highest standard of facility oversight. General seating will be available in the open space depending on weather and programming and seasons. So that will all be taken into account when we're looking at how we carry out the business of the Amphitrite House. After reviewing the two proponents, Cedar and Salt is able to meet the requirements of the RFP. Therefore, if Council wishes to lease Cedar and Salt a portion of the Amphitrite House, a notice of proposed property disposition is required pursuant to Section 26. And I'll leave it at that. And the Brandon is here, so if you have any questions for Brandon, he's here as well.
Any questions for Ms. Fortune? Councillor Anderson and I had a little tour of the facility a few weeks back, and
Oh, fantastic.
it's very impressive. The wraparound deck is absolutely spectacular. Yeah, looking forward to this opening.
Me too.
Yes. Does the applicant wish to say a few words?
Can I ask a question?
Sure. Yeah.
So the open area is going to have seating in it?
It will have some seating in the front area by the glass, and then depending on the day, if Wild Pacific Trail is doing some programming, there'll be some area for that, or if they're outside doing their programming outside, that will be taken into account as well.
Okay, so I just, I thought the vision involved like there being displays and things from Historical Society,
Oh,
or the Trail
absolutely.
Society, and
Yeah.
and I just was
So what-
reconciling the two things. In my
So
head.
through the mayor, what we're looking at doing is putting bar stools along the glass area in the corner as you're looking out into the water. The glass area is on your left-hand side, and we will look at putting some bar stool along that area so that there is some component and tables along that area. It tucks in quite nicely. You can put, Brandon, what did we say, 6 to 8?
I think 6 to 8 tables inside, and then I said I would like to have bar stools along the railing looking out onto the ocean as well, as long as it doesn't impede with the front door.
Yeah.
I think to draw people down there.
Yeah, people watching on Zoom can't hear you if you're not at the mic.
I think, for myself to run a proper food and beverage venue out of there, we need to have some inside seating. Even if it's 6 to 8 tables, we're going to have customers that are going to want to come down there that maybe don't want to walk the trail in the winter, but do want to support the business, do want to support the building, and it would be important to have some seating. I think to run a proper cafe, we have to have something. We can't just be pushing people outside when it's really that ugly out. That's all I have to say.
Any other questions for Brandon? No? Okay. There are 2 recommendations, and I believe they should be moved separately.
I have a comment that I'd like to make. It's not a specific question, but I just want to go on the record and state my opposition to leaving this space aside for such use. The entire time that this project was conceived, the way that it was communicated and shared with the public is that this was going to be a public space. This was going to be an asset to the community. This was going to be something for the people of Ucluelet, for visitors to Ucluelet, a shared resource. And now we're basically looking at a restaurant. And absolutely no disrespect or bias towards the proponent. I'd be opposed to any restaurant, any cafe, any kind of concession. So it has absolutely nothing to do with the proponent here. But now we're at the point where we're talking about attracting people to a cafe. Comments that council received, communication that we received from the Wild Pacific Trail Society was not supportive of this use, and my impression is that it's going to cause a degradation of the site. It's not at all what I think is in the best interest of the community. Wild Pacific Trail is one of our crown jewels. Lord knows that there's enough commercial space within Ucluelet that anyone who comes here and anyone who lives here has ample choice to have a coffee, to have a snack. I think we're going to see people crowding the space to use the commercial aspect of the space. We're going to have littering issues. We're going to have parking issues, and more importantly, it's going to turn one of our most spectacular natural areas into yet another extension of the commercialization that we see downtown. And that's where it should belong. We're a tourist community. I think that it's great that we have restaurants and businesses downtown, but to start running a cafe at the Wild Pacific Trail seems completely backwards, and it also seems completely against what the community was told for years as this project proceeded, that Amphitrite House was going to be set aside for the community. I think anyone who goes into a restaurant is going to feel like they're either going to have to patronize that restaurant or they're loitering. I don't see how any other use of that space is compatible. And I think that agreeing to this is basically saying, okay, so Amphitrite House is going to be a cafe moving forward. And I don't think that that's a good idea. So for those reasons, I'm against it, and I wouldn't support, awarding the contract.
I will comment that during the public open house, which was 4 years ago, maybe, all the sticky notes on the board said everybody wanted a coffee shop there. And so I don't know if you were there or not there, but you probably didn't put a sticky note that said that. But that's what the public was wanting. And so that's how it was designed, to incorporate that. And it will be space for the public and for special events in the evenings, I believe, for small
Yeah, through the mayor, there's definitely will be programming. We'll be working with Wild Pacific Trail to ensure that on inclement days that they have that opportunity to have programming in that area, as well as we'll be doing early morning program and evening program. And it's definitely meant, hopefully Res can do some stuff as well. And it's definitely meant to be used in that manner.
To answer to that, and I'll stay in my council role as opposed to my res role. So let's use the example of the Wild Pacific Trail. Does that mean that if they want to run an all-day program, the cafe is going to just shut down operations for the day, and the Wild Pacific Trail Society is going to be able to use that space?
No.
So how are those two things compatible? How can you have a coffee shop and patrons patronizing the coffee shop and use that space for educational purposes? Like, I don't understand how those two things can both happen at the same time in the same place. And those were the concerns that were brought up at the time that this came before council in December, I believe it was.
I think you have to go down and take a look. It's definitely doable.
Well, I've been in lots of coffee shops, and I've never been in one in which there could be an educational event taking place. I'm unless there's really something remarkable. I don't see how that's going to work, and I'm struggling to just accept on faith that that's possible.
I have faith.
I actually agree with Councillor Mafti, and I've had a number of people mention to me that they worry about the ability to use this space for any sort of educational purposes or anything with a cafe there. I know it says they've got plans to mitigate sound and stuff. I've presented educational programs in all sorts of places, and you cannot present it in a space like that. I don't think. I think it's really detrimental, and I think it removes the ability for this space to be used for any sort of educational stuff. I agree there could be, displays up, but to actually do a presentation in that space, I don't see it.
And this is a community resource. This isn't a piece of commercial property. This is a building that, RMI money went into refurbishing for the use and for the benefit of the community, and to basically give what is subsidized rent to a commercial operation. I think it's disingenuous to even pretend like these two things are compatible. So I've said my piece. I don't want to flog a dead horse, but I really think this would be an unfortunate and probably irreversible step that is going to really compromise one of the absolute highlight attractions of our community. I think it's a well-known and well-established fact that the Wild Pacific Trail is pretty much number one in terms of what visitors appreciate when they come to Ucluelet. And I think it's pretty much number one in terms of what residents appreciate. And everyone appreciates the Wild Pacific Trail and the Amphitrite Point as a space to appreciate natural beauty, not as a space that, it would be so much better if only I could get a coffee here. You already have to drive through town to get out there. There's nothing preventing someone from buying a coffee and then driving the remaining 3 minutes and enjoying their coffee at Amphitrite. But it really goes against what I think is the whole point of establishing the Wild Pacific Trail there. So I think, to me, this is like a no-brainer. There's not even a gray area for me.
Well, most of the Wild Pacific Trail educational walks and talks are outdoors. So they would utilize it more often in the winter, I'm assuming, when the weather is bad.
Yeah, but I don't think they'd be able to use it at all. And we haven't established that, but the whole point of the RFP was to find someone that could use the space full time. So whoever's in there, Cedar and Salt is going to be in there 12 months of the year, all the time. So it's not like there's a downtime when the space could be used for anything else. So if we approve this, we're committing to turning Amphitrite House, which was supposed to be a community space, into a municipal government subsidized commercial operation for a sole operator. I understand that there was an RFP process, but the bottom line is that this was not the intended use. At some point or another, maybe it was a discussed use, But I remember the way that this project was pitched. I remember the way that this project was discussed. And I do not at all agree that a coffee shop was the intention and RMI funds were allocated to basically have the municipality build a coffee shop for somebody else to operate.
The coffee shop was incorporated into the plans, into the architectural plans, because that's what the public said they wanted.
My understanding of that is that that would be the ability of, for example, an educational institution or organization to also have the ability to have some kind of concession, whereas that would be like a secondary use where I don't want to keep pointing to the Wild Pacific Trail Society, but let's say if the Wild Pacific Trail Society was in there, they could have, a cafe night, or if they wanted to host an educational event, they would have the ability to provide people with snacks, kind of like how Darwin's Cafe used to operate at the Tofino Botanical Gardens. The bottom line here is that's no longer what we're talking about. That's not what's before council today. And what's before council today, we're facing a binary decision. Either we approve a coffee shop as the primary occupant of this space, or we don't. And I think that if we do, it precludes any other use of that space in any kind of realistic way. And I think that would be a big mistake.
Through the go ahead.
Councillor Anderson.
Oh yeah, no, I would just I hear what both Councillor Mafti and Councillor Hoare are saying. I wouldn't discount that whatsoever, but at the same time, I think this has been a something that we heard of before, and this did come up as part of the plan, and the difficulty is as much as we could be passionate about whether it's the trail or litter or things like that. This was something that we brought up before, and the tough part, it's not a tough part, but what we have to do is represent like the greater community, I think, in this case. And if people came to the open house and they made that effort to put the sticky note or whatever in this case, I think it's if the people of the community want it in that number, then that was the time to make that decision and move forward with it, and it was built into the plan. I definitely hear what you're saying and how you feel about it, and I'm not discounting that, but I just think it's a situation where there was an open house for this situation, and that's where that decision was put in play.
I'd respectfully counter that that's when the discussion was had. The decision is the one facing us here tonight. And it's not, this wasn't a referendum. So for better or for worse, I think we have to make a decision based on the information at hand. And so I appreciate the point that, people came out and suggested that they'd like a coffee shop there. But I personally don't feel that that's in the best interest of the community. And that's not necessarily just my opinion. That's based on lots of other people that I've spoken to. So I it's true, I wasn't there for this open house, so I didn't see these sticky notes, but I know that the people who show up to an open house represent a fairly small minority, and I don't think that that's how we should decide things in this community. And so where I'm coming from is a point that's been informed by lots of conversations, by correspondence that we've received. I'd respectfully suggest that, I think some people would like to see a coffee shop in here, but overall it's not in the best interest of the community, and nor does it reflect necessarily the majority of the community, perhaps the majority of the people who showed up to the open house.
Well, the RFP was an open process, and there were 2 applicants. One was the Wild Pacific Trail Society, but they didn't meet the criteria of the RFP. So they had that opportunity, but they didn't meet the criteria. Is that correct, Ms. Fortune?
That is correct. I might also add that with this whole process and the public process that we did initially, and then as we developed the project out, has always had a cafe component to it. And that has been there from day one, including when we applied for the grant and all that, and dealt with RMI as well. The Wild Pacific Trail were not able to meet the minimum requirement because we do need oversight of the space as well, because we can't just have the building open on its own. So that is a significant entity to consider. The the intent is that it is to have some public space there as well, in which we can do some programming. And that's what the Wild Pacific Trail was interested in.
Councillor Anderson?
Can we see how this goes? Can we see if there's a coexistence between these two things, and address this again later if in fact it is a disturbance to the educational programming? We can address that. I'm not opposed to that, but I just think that the wheels have been in motion for this, and it seems like this is the direction that people have chosen. And I would like to think that they'll coexist, but I could be wrong, and I think we can come back and address that later if it becomes an issue. But I'd like to see if it could.
We've heard from the Wild Pacific Trail Society that told us unequivocally, in no uncertain terms, that it's their opinion that it was impossible for these two uses to be complementary or overlap. So if one person is telling us, yeah, this isn't going to work at all, I'm a little bit curious as to what set of circumstances would prompt them to revisit that. Furthermore, this is a 2-year period, and I understand that the proponent obviously wants you're not going to open up a coffee shop and run it for 6 months or something. I think once this is done, it's done, and so it's I guess we'll see how it goes if this gets voted through. But if it doesn't work out, we don't have an option. We can't really go back. I really cannot imagine that after 2 years we're going to say, actually, know what? We're gonna kick the coffee shop out. I would have liked to see changes to the RFP. I would have liked to see more of an effort to work with the Wild Pacific Trail Society and other community groups. I think the way the RFP was presented, I don't want to say the process was rigged, but the requirements and the expectations were really only compatible with a commercial use to begin with. And so that's why the number one applicant was a commercial operator. But again, I don't think that that's the intended use of this space.
I think it was always the intended use of this space.
To have it as a commercial operation, like a private coffee shop.
A coffee shop. So who's going to run a coffee shop? Volunteers? Volunteers aren't going to run a coffee shop.
Okay, well, I'd be. That's not my understanding. That's not my recollection, and that wasn't the impression that I got over the years that this project was being discussed. That we were going to allocate RMI funds as a community to build a coffee shop for somebody else to operate for profit.
Well, the building belongs to the municipality, not to any organization. And so the RFP was put out to find someone to operate the facility. And two applicants came through. And one didn't meet all the criteria, so the other applicant was successful.
Yeah, I guess the last point I'd make is that operate the facility is the crux of it for me, because to operate the facility, as was my understanding, that the original intention of the facility was a public space. And so if now what the RFP was for was to find someone who can operate a commercial business in the space, then it makes sense that a commercial operator applied and was successful. But I don't think that was the intention. And I think that if you distill it down, what we've done, if we vote this through as a municipality, is allocate RMI funding to become a commercial landlord. And I don't think that's the role of a municipality, to manage public space for private use.
The RFP was for oversight of the building so that staff would not have to be there 7 days a week, 9 to 5. It was for oversight for the building, and it makes sense that a business would do that in order to operate their little business while doing so. Do we have any other comments from any other councillors?
I'd like to say something.
Councillor Kennington.
I'm just curious, where are these tables going? Because I see the lease area in red, but I don't see where you would fit tables in that lease area. Am I wrong?
Yeah, the lease area is kind of like where the counters and the cupboards and the little workspace is, correct?
So is that where the bar top is and where the tables are?
I think Brandon was talking about potentially having them against the window. Is that right?
Yeah. That's what Abby and I discussed, yes.
I just want to, we're not talking about these here against that window, are we?
Yeah, look.
Well, you got the lease area here, and then the big open space, and then there's.
I think I can clarify. So the proponent would be operating out of the red square area, so that would be the leased area. The open space would be public space. The intent and the discussions that Abby, the Director of Community Services, and the proponent had were options to have a couple of tables in the public space that could be moved around, used depending on what's going on in the facility. So the primary purpose of the open area that is outside of the leased area would be for public uses. But when there's opportunity, there's a couple of chairs and tables for, people that have visited the proponent space or just visiting that space. So it wouldn't be dedicated to the proponent's use, only for the cafe. Same for the deck, like that is the public area, that is public space. Programming, activity, free access would be the priority in that common area that is used throughout the year. Now, during the winter months, where community programming from, say, the Wild Pacific Trail Society or other societies or groups is less, doesn't happen as often, then there's an opportunity to put additional tables in there, do different activities, to do different displays, use that space however the community would like for programming through the Community Services Department. So Community Services would take an active role in programming that space, working with different societies to organize different times for presentations, activities, discussions, etc., etc. And those would always be the priority in that open space.
It sounds like we're leasing the whole space, not this red square.
Proponent would be responsible for the leased area only. That's where their access would be. But we'd always have tables. They always plan to have a few tables around, which could be definitely used as well for people that are buying a coffee or a sandwich. So it would be multiple. It would be used by both.
How could it be used by both? Like, how if the proponent is going to lease the leased area, but then use the whole area, how does it work? If
it would not be using the whole area.
Okay, but they're going to put tables and chairs in the whole area.
They would be the municipalities' tables and chairs, not the proprietors.
Okay, but if I come in, who's going to be using these tables and chairs if not patrons of the business?
The general public. So the general public could be a patron of that coffee shop, or they could just be visiting the space, or they could be having a discussion with a presentation. So it'll change throughout the day, throughout the week, depending on the use of that open space.
How does it work if I, with the res, decide, hey, you know what, I want to take a field school there at noon in June?
Pass that back over to Abby.
Through the mayor, you would book through myself. So the intent is to try and keep the timing open during the day so visitors can come in and out. We're hoping to have some display cases that the Historical Society is hopefully going to help us with. And so the intent during the day is to have a little bit more free flowing. If we're having an evening reception, then, or you need the space to do a programming session, then Brandon's group would be out by then because they're in till 5 at this moment. That's what's being proposed. And then you'd have the evening to do.
So our field school program runs in the elementary school, so we're dealing with the school kids during the school day. So if I wanted to take kids there during the school day, would I be able to do that and use the community space?
We could look at that, certainly.
Would you look at that and say, no, it's not compatible because Brandon's running a coffee shop in there?
At this stage, I don't have an answer for that. I don't know.
That seems to me a pretty pressing question that we should be able to answer confidently before we vote on how we're going to allocate this community space. Because my concern, and I now I'm speaking as one of the potential users of this community space running nonprofit educational programming, my concern is that I would approach the landlord and say, hey, I'd like to use this space as a community group, and being told, well, you know what, this isn't a great time because this is a really busy time for the coffee shop, and it's not really great because, you know, those tables and chairs that are there for the community are kind of filled up with people patronizing the coffee shop. So why don't you come back to us in, you know, like a Tuesday in January?
I'm guessing if it was a one-off thing like your field school, that perhaps the coffee shop could just be closed for an hour. How long would you need to be in there for?
I don't think it's about how long I need to be in there for. If it's a community space, it shouldn't be for 1 hour. It should be there for the community all the time. I can get Long Beach Lodge to close the great room for an hour if I want a one-off as a community group, right? Like that's the way that we all have to operate. And I'm speaking for all community groups here, because all of us are struggling with the same challenges of how do we secure space. And so we rely on local businesses. But it seems frustrating to me that now that as a municipality, we've invested in a shared community resource that we've set aside for community use, that we've decided actually what we're going to operate out of it is a commercial enterprise, and the community groups that we sort of sold on the idea are going to be relegated to kind of second tier ask, and maybe if we can fit you in, it'll sort of work. We already have that relationship with enough businesses in their own commercially licensed space. And I just don't understand why the one thing that's different about Amphitrite House versus all of the other commercial space is that it's actually community space that community money went into. So basically what we're doing is we've got community space that now we're going to turn into commercial space.
There were no tax dollars involved in this project, were there?
Through the mayor. A lot of this is RMI funding, so it's tourism space. And that was a lot of what we when we sold the project to RMI.
Yeah, there was a grant initially,
Yes.
and then RMI funds, I think, picked up the rest.
That is correct.
So no tax dollars went into this.
I didn't say tax dollars, I said RMI dollars.
You said community money.
I believe that the RMI funds are given to resort municipalities as a community.
Correct.
Okay.
And this is a community space.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's a commercial space.
I think the two can work together.
But they can't be the same thing. It can't be a community space and a commercial space. It's one or the other. And that's the question that we're being asked to vote on tonight is, are we okay with turning this into a commercial space, or do we want to see a different use for it, which is as of yet unclear? Would it go back to a different RFP with different conditions? But if council votes yes on the 2-year term for the proponent of this RFP, Cedar and Salt, it's going to be a commercial space.
It's going to be a combination of the two. And it was purpose-built to include a coffee shop. That's been in the plan for years.
And the point that I brought up more than once as well is the noise factor. It is espresso drinks. We all know how noisy an espresso machine is. That is not quiet. So trying to actually present something in a space next to a functioning coffee shop.
I think if there was a presentation going on, that there could be an option for drip coffee.
With all due respect to someone who's been running community events in commercial spaces for almost a decade, that's one of the major problems that we have, is no one is willing to compromise the economic viability of their business. We've tried to do evening talks in 15 different restaurants. They are obviously not going to close down their bar. They're obviously not going to shut down serving people. That's I mean, like, let's just be realistic about it. And I don't think it's realistic to say that if a community group is in there, they're only going to serve drip coffee. I just don't think that that's a realistic, fair thing to say. With all due respect, based on my experience rather than my opinion.
Ms. Fortune, have you had a discussion about noise with the proponent?
We've had a starting of a discussion, yes. And Brandon's aware of the concerns and issues and will try and mitigate as much as he can.
Okay. Any further questions for staff?
I'm going to admit I would love to go have a coffee there, but I also agree that those two uses are not compatible. So I don't think calling it a mixed-use space is realistic. I think it's a coffee shop. So what we're deciding on is if we want a coffee shop there. And, like, I don't think I completely don't usually agree with Councillor Mafty on anything, but today I do. But I'm just kidding. That's not true. It's a tough one because I love coffee and it's a great place to go for one. But I also agree that it's not compatible. I don't know what the solution.
I love coffee too, and I take a thermos mug down there, and it's amazing because you can watch the ocean and have peace and quiet. And I know it's like a 2-minute drive, but my coffee stays hot in my thermos mug. It works.
The first thing that came to mind was, like a trial run, as Councillor Anderson was mentioning, but I see the lease is 2 years, and then my other problem with it is the lease rate for a little red rectangle when really it's more than double that size. So they're getting one hell of a deal. So let's call it what it is. If we're going to lease, if this thing's going to be a coffee shop, then lease the whole thing as a coffee shop, and then we'll rent it back to do community events, because it sounds like the majority of the time and the majority of the use is going to be a coffee shop.
Yeah. I mean, I've been down there, so it seems like a much bigger space than I thought, and I'm not a coffee shop expert. I don't know, but to me, it seems like they could coexist. And I also haven't done programming like you have, so I can't speak to that. All I can say is that our job is to represent the community, and to me, it seems like the community has spoken, and gave us direction on where this is going. It's interesting we spend more time on this than housing. But at the end of the day, I think whatever our personal feelings are, whether we like coffee or we don't, it's like the public has spoken, and that's why we're here. We're representing them, and I don't discount what you're saying at all. And I'll be the first to if it did go through, I'd be the first to jump on the sword and say I was wrong if it didn't work out. But as far as I'm concerned, when we're sitting up here, we're representing the people of the town, and all I have to go on is that's moved forward already.
Yeah, I mean, the discussion we're having is who we're leasing it to, not what the space was, where it's going. So,
It was purposely built, renovated to include a coffee shop.
Yeah, but it always seemed at the beginning that it was sort of like a support. It played a supporting role in what the primary role was, which was a community space with the ability to grab a coffee, and now it's a coffee shop with the ability to host an event there. Like I think the vibe has changed on it, and I don't even know where I stand on this. I don't know if my hand's going up for which. I just want to support my fellow councillors who feel strongly about it either way, and keep the dialogue going and making sure that we're making the right decision.
But it is a community space. There will be visitors and locals going in there all the time, whether they buy a coffee or don't buy a coffee. It's a spectacular space with a great view of the water and the lighthouse, and the builders have done a fantastic job. Having been in there, the little red box that you see is actually not a big portion of it. There's a lot of space still left for people to mill about or to sit down and have a program presented to them.
So I guess one thing I'm wondering is, can I go in there with my laptop, not buy a coffee, and sit in one of the prime seats, and no one's going to tell me to leave?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to do that.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to do that. It's spectacular.
Can we bring
there.
our own coffee?
You can bring your own coffee.
Okay.
You have to buy a hot chocolate for all the kids if the Rain Coast Education Society comes in.
I don't see us going in, and I'm not saying that to be a poopy pants. I'm just being realistic. It's completely incompatible for our use. We've heard from the Wild Pacific Trail Society that it's completely incompatible for their use, and of all the other community organizations with which I'm familiar in this town, it's incompatible for their uses as well. And so I think I've made myself totally clear, and I'm cognizant that I'm using up everyone's time, so I'm going to leave it at that. But I'm not crazy about the idea of proceeding as if it's somehow ambiguous, as if, you know, oh yeah, maybe community groups are going to use it. It's I don't think it's going to work, and my concern is even if we wanted to, we wouldn't be given permission to do it.
The coffee shop closes at 5, so any community group could book it after that.
Yeah, I know that, but that's not when most community groups do programming. Like realistically, the time to reach people in the community for the bulk of programming is visitors during the summer, during the day, which is when the coffee shop is going to be busy. Other than one-off evening events, the other major group that most organizations target, the demographic that we target, are school kids, which are only available and accessible to our programming during school hours. Which again, that's kind of like saying, yeah, this is a great place to have a school group as long as it's in the evening. Well, that's why it's not compatible, because you're not going to get a school group there in the evening.
But
So
there's lots of other nonprofits that don't deal with school kids.
I can only speak for the one that I'm the most familiar with, and the ones that communicated directly with me through my council email or approached me on behalf of their organization. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe the Prass will have an art show in there. I'm not sure. Like I'm sure that there are some uses, but as Councillor Kennington said, what we're basically talking about is, will this coffee shop allow someone else to do anything else in there through the municipality? So like at that point, any commercial space is a public space.
Miss Fortune, did you want to answer that one?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
No, I was making a point that I don't think it's. Anyway, I've said everything I'm gonna say. I don't want to take up any more of our time.
So through the mayor, the intent is that it is a open space, whether it be for tourism, Wild Pacific Trail programming, res programming. The intent is that it is an open space to coincide with the cafe as well. So it is meant to be side by side. There's evening accessibility. There's early morning accessibility. In the summertime, Wild Pacific Trail will probably do most of their stuff outside. We've got good programming space on the deck. So I think there's many sub opportunities throughout that green space right by the house there.
What's the capacity of the building, like the max occupancy?
James, I think it's 50. Does that sound right? Yeah.
I think it's about the same size as Activity Room 1 and 2 put together.
That's correct.
Yeah, if you can picture that.
I can picture it. I'm just thinking if the coffee shop's having a good day and someone wants to take, like, you know, we might exceed the capacity, at which point, well, the coffee shop's already operating in there. Anyway, whatever.
Councillor Anderson?
No.
No?
Well, okay. Just to keep it going. Yeah, again, I hear what you're saying, and I think, yeah, it is RMI, so it is paid for by tourist. Well, it was tourist money that or RMI is Resort Municipality, and that's what paid for the place. And I think with the enjoyment of the people that come, a lot of the people I've talked to are interested in having it, but that's by no means a scientific poll or survey. So I just always have to defer to what the original open house resulted in, which was to go forward with the coffee shop. That's it from me.
So would someone like to make a recommendation?
I'll put it out on the floor. I would move that council authorize staff to issue a public notice of property disposition for a portion of the lands having the PID 0301040009 and legal description Block B, District Lot 1517, Clackwood Land District, and DL 1507, and more commonly referred to as Amphitrite House, Cafe section, by way of lease to Salt and Cedar for an initial term of 2 years with an annual fee of $24,000 plus $1,200 GST for a total of $25,200 with an option to renew annually for an additional 3 years.
Do I have a seconder?
Is that a typo? I believe the name is Cedar and Salt, not Salt and Cedar, correct? Brendan? Yeah. It's a typo in our,
You don't have to read it all over again. I will second that motion. Any further discussion?
I just want to briefly mention once again that my objections have nothing to do with the proponent at all, and it's nothing personal, and it's nothing against this particular business.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? And that carries. And the next motion?
I will further move that upon completion of the notice of disposition process, council authorize the Director of Community Services to execute a 2-year lease with option to renew annually for an additional 3 years with Cedar and Salt for the purpose of providing cafe services and oversight of the Amphitrite House building during regular business hours.
And I'll second that. Any further discussion?
The 3 years is automatic if we approve this. Is that not an opportunity to check in and see if it is working?
Rather than make this motion carry, you mean?
Yeah, I'm just asking, I guess I'm asking the question.
If I may, Mayor McEwen, so the standard lease agreements usually has a provision to have the option to renew. That is by mutual agreement. So either party would be able to withdraw from that. It's not an automatic. It has to be under agreement.
So at the point where it goes to renew, would this come back to council for review?
It doesn't typically come back to council, but it's within the lease agreement. So if anything were to come up, direction to staff to say, no, this isn't working out, then the municipality could elect to do it, or we could bring it back to council at that point in time. But it's not an automatic back to council.
Can I?
Any further discussion?
I'd like to raise one final point. This whole idea of let's revisit it and see if it's working. It's gonna work. There's no way a coffee shop renting this space, arguably the most prime real estate in our entire community, for $2,000 a month, that's gonna work. It's gonna work like gangbusters. And the community groups are the only other voice of opposition, and they've already spoken in opposition now. So it's gonna work. It's not like no one's gonna come forward and say anything that they haven't already said. So the only thing that's gonna happen 2 years down the road is that people are gonna say, oh yeah, this worked really well. You know, the coffee shop made a killing, and it was great, and people patronized the coffee shop, and you know, like.
I think what I was trying to get across was if it didn't work for the community groups, because we're hearing that, oh, it's going to work, don't worry. So at that point, after 2 years, if it's not working
But I don't think anyone's even going to try to use that space. It's like why would I even try? Again, I can only speak for myself, but it's like, why would I even try to use a space that I know is completely unsuitable for my purposes?
Well, that will be your loss, because I think it will work for community groups, and you may well just find that it does.
well, there have been a number of community groups who have been speaking against it from the get-go, that there shouldn't be a cafe in the space.
I've only heard from 2.
I've heard from 4.
There's a lot more than 4 community groups.
Those are the 4 that have spoken to me over the apples.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? And that carries.
Thank you.
The final report item is 7.3, Ucluelet Economic Development Corporation. This report will be presented by the Manager of Corporate Services.
Through the mayor. The District of Ucluelet is the sole shareholder of a corporation known as the Ucluelet Economic Development Corporation. Historically, or in recent history, that corporation has been inactive, at least for as long as I've been with the district, so for the last 5 years. Which means we've just been filing annual reports to keep it above water, basically, and to keep it in good standing. We missed that annual report last year, and we missed updating our current council members to be the current board members. The series of motions that I'm recommending here will first of all update and confirm. So first of all, it'll confirm the structure of the company, and then it'll update to our current council members. The motions are a little bit odd, right? Because you're sitting as council, as the shareholder and the representative of the district, and then you're sitting as the board members. Then the third motion is directing us to file the annual report and directing us to update the director change form and then file that. And then the fourth motion is a little bit different. You'd be directing us to present the documents required to dissolve this inactive corporation. So you're not making that decision today. We would prepare and present those documents and for council's consideration, or I guess council and the board's consideration at a future meeting after we get all the financial matters in order. Dissolution's a little bit of a process, and we just have to make sure the books are in order before we got to cross our T's and dot our I's before we present that those resolutions to you. I can try to answer any questions you may have, and obviously that's why I'm here right now.
Questions from council? Nope, I don't think there's any questions. So we have 4 recommendations, and they should be moved separately.
Okay, I've got it. I will move that council approve and authorize the mayor and corporate officer to execute the following resolutions. 1, shareholders resolution of Ucluelet Economic Development Corporation attached as Appendix A to report number 24-42. And 2, joint resolutions of all the directors and all of the voting and non-voting shareholders of Ucluelet Economic Development Corporation attached as Appendix B to report number 24-42.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor Anderson, any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries.
I move that the directors of the Ucluelet Economic Development Corporation approve joint resolutions of all of the directors and all of the voting and non-voting shareholders of Ucluelet Economic Development Corporation attached as Appendix B to report number 24-42.
I'll second that as well.
Councillor Anderson seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries.
I move that the directors of the Ucluelet Economic Development Corporation authorize staff to update and file the following forms. 1, the 2023 annual report attached to report number 24-42 as Appendix C, and 2, director change form attached to report number 24-42 as Appendix D.
I'll continue to second.
Councillor Anderson seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries.
And finally, I will move that council direct staff to present the documents required to dissolve the Ucluelet Economic Development Corporation for council consideration at a future meeting.
I'll second that.
Councillor Kennington seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor? None opposed? That carries. Thank you. Are there any notices of motion? Seeing none, there are 2 correspondence items. The first one is from SD 70, School District 70, regarding the tennis courts. In this letter, it asks if the district is interested in pursuing a partnership regarding the use of this land for a tennis court. And it looks like a meeting was held back in January with the Ucluelet Racket Sports Club, the District of Ucluelet, and the Pacific Rim Rotary Club. Mr. Lawrence, what would this entail to just pursue a partnership?
The district could enter into discussions with the school district and any other organizations that were interested. We'd be essentially looking for grant funding or dedicated alternate sources of funding, whether that's tax dollars or grant funds or some other combination thereof. I do recall a conversation with the school district, and one of the challenges they had is that the cost to redevelop them is about $700,000. Yeah, yes, and that was the primary reason that they ran into the issue with redeveloping those tennis courts. They had originally thought about $250,000, but the costs have apparently, according to our discussions, skyrocketed. So that's where the primary obstacle would be. So if this is something that council would like us to pursue, we could consider allocations of funds or resources in this next year's financial plan, or enter into discussions with the school district to see what options are available.
I think it wouldn't hurt to carry on the discussions, for sure, and especially if the Rotary Club is interested in participating as well. Would you require a motion for that, or is that just something that would continue on?
We would always be always having discussions, but if council wants to ensure that this is an objective that is moved forward with the goal of creating a tennis court, then a resolution could be issued.
Okay, well, I will move that staff continue conversations with SD70 regarding pursuing a partnership regarding the use of this land for a tennis court.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries. Thank you. The second letter is from Surfrider. And this is regarding the littering bylaws that have been in place with the District of Ucluelet since 2004 and the District of Tofino since 2009. And they are asking that those littering bylaws maybe should be updated. I believe that's the gist of this very long letter. What would that entail, Mr. Lawrence?
It would entail staff time to review the existing bylaws to determine what could be updated to reflect maybe the request within the letter. Essentially, it would be a matter of staff time and considering it in the variety of other priorities of council that are currently with staff.
Does council have an appetite for this?
In light of a cafe going out at Amphitrite House and the potential for litter, maybe it does make sense to really drive that home. It might raise more money than the parking program.
Would you like to make a motion?
Let's see, what would that motion look like? I will move that staff prepare a report to review existing fines for littering and come up with a new number that reflects the importance of this issue.
Great. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Excellent. Any further discussion?
I think this is wasting staff's time. I'd be surprised if a single littering fine had been handed out. We could make the fines $1 trillion if we're not going to enforce it. What's the point? And to ask staff to prepare a report, I think their time is better spent working on more pressing issues before them, with all due respect to the Surfrider chapter and the good intentions of this initiative.
Do we know if bylaw does actively give littering fines?
They have the ability to provide a fine, but as Councillor Mafty indicated, giving fines for littering means that you have to be present and see the littering occur at that moment to issue a fine. So having increased fines for littering specifically wouldn't necessarily reduce their occurrence of littering. As you can see, like for, I don't know, the thing that comes to my mind personally is the waste bags for dogs. They're around the trails all the time. You have to be there to see it, to enforce it. So if littering is a high priority, a high concern for the community and council, then updating the littering bylaw might not be the most effective way. It would be increasing enforcement and having more people watching out for that type of activity and enforcing the bylaw that we currently have. And if the fines needed to be improved from then that would be an option for council to consider. But it is exceptionally hard to deal with unless there is somebody's name, address, and phone number on the litter that was dropped on the side that has been reported and then processed.
Okay, thanks for that information. In light of that, all in favor?
Can I, so.
Sure.
I know that there's been more discussion about sort of causing people who produce the trash to be responsible for the trash. That's happening in Europe particularly. I don't know. I don't know if it's something that like we could easily do, but it's that I worry there's a lot of plastic pollution. I agree. I pick up poop bags next to my car all the time, every day, literally. Yeah, I don't know. It's just there's been a lot of discussion about working on a way to hold people responsible for the trash they need to package their products or to work on a way to recycle that or something. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm sort of like spitballing in a bad way. It's more than I'm babbling.
You didn't make that stupid motion.
No, but I seconded it, and I seconded it because, like, I agree. There's way too much garbage out there, and there's way too much trash being dropped, and I foresee the coffee shop trash being everywhere. I mean, I foresee, like, I see it all the time. I pick it up all the time on my walk just from work to home, which is literally 50 baby steps, and it's frustrating to me. But I agree, we don't have enough peeps to have the oversight and to be hitting people with fines, and because you do have to actually see it happen. I don't know. Sorry, babbling. Just totally babbling.
Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed?
Oh yeah, no way. Can't do that.
Okay. And that is not carried. Okay, there are two information items. There's the RCMP monthly policing report for April. Anybody want to discuss that? And there's Save the Date 2024 Community Safety and Wellbeing Conference in Victoria. Anyone want to pull that one out? No, no one's interested in going? Okay, mayor's announcements and council committee reports. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. Through the mayor. Not too much to report on my side. There, last week we had a Chamber of Commerce Economic Development Committee meeting with Mr. Jenkins over here, and it was great. We talked about potential initiatives and projects, and we did a roundtable with stakeholders and members of the committee. I don't know, how many people were there? Do you remember? 14. Yeah, about 14 people. So yeah, that was great. There was a member of the economic development. There's an economic development officer from the YFN was there as well, which is Corey. So that's great. Yeah, and things are progressing nicely. So I think we all talked about like resource acquisition, communication, and things like that. And yeah, it was a good one to go to. And that was about it for me, I think.
Great, thank you. Councillor Hoare.
Last week we had the Society's Committee of the Whole, which is always interesting, and I always get something out of it. And I love that May is Childcare Month in BC. That made me kind of, feel good about the soon-to-be-open Little Beans. I love that the aquarium is now doing story time for kids, looking for more volunteers to read. Really must find that kids book that I have misplaced, Mr. Gregg, the Johnny Stickleback, and I've got to find it. Sorry, sidebar. I also was at the Historical Society's plant sale, which went really well, and I've never seen plants disappear so fast. And people get, you know, little grabby. There might even be a photo of Courtney and I fighting over a plant, because we do that every year. She got home and then texted me and said, I didn't get my lilies of the valley, so somebody snagged them out of her pile of plants. So whoever got the really nice lilies of the valley in a large pot, if you want to split them, I know somebody who's looking for some. But always a good fundraiser for everybody, and it's always fun to see everybody come out for that. And yesterday we had an extended workshop on housing, so I feel very informed about housing. Just saying. That's it for me.
Great, thank you. I'm still recovering from that housing workshop.
You and me both.
Councillor Kennington.
As with Councillor Anderson, I attended the Economic Development Committee meeting, and I have nothing to add to what Councillor Anderson spoke of. It was great.
Perfect. Councillor Mafty.
I also attended the housing workshop. I also attended the Society's Community of the Whole. I also attended the Clayoquot Biosphere Trust's Regional Forum. Good times had by all. And I also attended the ACRD Alternate Directors Orientation Training Session, which was interesting. And I'm glad to have that information should I ever need to avail myself of it. And it was great to meet other alternate directors and other folks from the ACRD and other communities.
I meant to ask you how that went. It was well attended, I heard.
I attended by Zoom, but it seemed that everyone who was expected to be there was there. And I think about half to 2/3 zoomed in, and some folks were in person in Port Alberni.
Great. And that's it for you?
That's it for me.
Perfect. Okay, for myself, May 1st, I attended a Harbour Air meeting on Teams, and that's where they informed us that they are delaying by 1 year. They're not going to be operating this summer. They just got a little behind the 8 ball with trying to figure out a place to have their office down near Whiskey Dock, and a variety of things that just got a little too late into the season for them to do any marketing for it. So they're looking at next summer, being here next summer. May 2nd was my second time on Tough City Radio, and apparently there is a link to the recordings that will be shared with everybody on the monthly newsletter. Is that right, Miss Owen? For those that didn't get a chance to listen. May 7th was the Committee of the Whole meeting. We had 10 societies give information. I always love those meetings. On the 8th, I attended an ACRD Committee of the Whole meeting in the morning by Zoom. That was their Parks and Trails signage strategy, which has nothing to do with the West Coast, but it was interesting anyway, just to see what they're doing in the Alberni Valley. And their Parks Services 2023 annual report. And then I attended the ACRD board meeting in the afternoon that day on the 8th, and nothing had anything to do with the West Coast at that one either. And then that evening was the chamber mixer, the first chamber mixer in a long, long time. And it was a beautiful evening, and it was held outside at the CR Law office. And I think there was like 50, 60 people there at one point. It was really well attended, really good time. So thanks for hosting that. Well, the chamber put it on, but I guess the host was CR Law and Rob Anderson, and the credit union were the three businesses that kind of hosted. And then on the 13th was the Committee of the Whole meeting on housing last night, which was 5 hours, just saying. And the next ACRD meeting is actually going to be here in Ucluelet. So if anybody's interested in that. Let me look it up. It's Wednesday, May 22nd. So next Wednesday at 1:30 here in this room. So that's the first time that they've switched the meeting around, so it's not in Port Alberni.
I was
for a
going to
change.
ask. I didn't think it had ever been anywhere but Port.
They used to years ago switch it up between Tofino and Ucluelet and Port Alberni, and they're just going to start doing that again. So that's kind of nice. I don't have to drive to Port that day.
Yay.
And my alternate is welcome to attend.
Oh, yeah.
Now that you've been orientated.
Oh, man. I'm laser focused.
Okay, question period. This is an
I
opportunity.
don't think we should both be in the same place at the same time, though. Because what if something happens?
Right. Then
Like
there's
the president and the vice president, like they never fly together. And stuff.
right. Okay.
That's what they taught us at the meeting, actually. So
Really?
no.
So you could zoom in and Marilyn could be present in the room or vice versa.
I'll have to look into that.
Yes. Okay, this is an opportunity for the public to ask questions and comment on matters within council's jurisdiction. Representations about matters that council is prohibited from holding a public hearing on and matters that were subject to a public hearing are not permitted at this time. So that means that council will not receive verbal comments on bylaw number 1341, which was item 6.2, Warehouser Ocean West Phase 5, or bylaw 1346, which was item 6.3, small scale multi-unit housing, and bylaw number 1345, B&B regulation and new R1-H zone, because they are public hearings, and we don't accept public comment on those items. So are there any audience members that wish to address council? Sure, go up to the podium.
Very good. Barbara Schramm, 1958 Bay Street, and with my Wild Pacific Trail Society hat on. I just wanted to thank the long discussion in support of Amphitrite House as a public venue. We obviously concur, and given this decision, we definitely support continued discussions where we can be a part of that space and perhaps visually give the clue to the public that that half of this space isn't a restaurant. So if we can make it a visual separation, it would be less likely to be considered an invasion of the restaurant space for public use. Just a thought. But we stand ready to work with the district and with the restaurant for the best case scenario moving forward. And thanks for your support.
Thanks, Barb. Anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak? Ms. Owen, are there any members of the public attending on Zoom or telephone that would like to address us?
If anyone on Zoom wishes to speak, please raise your hand. Via telephone, use star 9. It doesn't appear that anyone wishes to speak.
Okay, have we received any emails to communityinput@ucluelet.ca?
No emails received during the meeting. Also, I'd just like to clarify that 1341, bylaws 1341, 1345, and 1346 were prohibited from holding public hearings on those. That's why the mayor couldn't receive comment on them.
Okay, thank you. There is no need to go into closed session this evening, so I will move that the May 4th, 2024 regular council meeting be adjourned at 6:04. Can I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. All in favor? None opposed? That carries. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Hey Brock, did you want to chat with me? Or do you want to just call you later? Okay.